The stone of the circle was 900 years old, and it remembered every foot that had ever stood on it. That was not superstition. The Kharuun cut their arenas from living basalt and then let the basalt wear. 9 centuries of boots and bare soles and falling bodies had polished the center of that great black disk until it shone like a lake at night, and around the rim, where the crowds pressed and the losers were carried out, the stone was still rough as the day it cooled. You could read the whole history of the place in that gradient. You could see, in the shine, exactly where people had been willing to stand. At the center of the shine alone stood a woman. She was tall even for her people, which meant she stood a head above most human men, and she was built the way a bridge is built. Not for beauty, though she had that too, in the severe way a blade has it, but for load. Her skin was the deep gray-brown of river clay, and along her forearms and the ridge of her cheekbones ran the faint pale striations the Kharuun called *vora*, the marks that thickened and silvered with age and injury, so that an old warrior's arms looked like weathered stone. Hers were still mostly smooth. That told you something. It told you that in 11 years of standing on that shine, very few people had ever managed to hurt her. Her name was Kharuun. The Accord's news feeds called her the Unbroken, which was a translation, and like most translations it was almost right and therefore completely wrong. She lifted her head. The amphitheater was full, 80,000 Kharuun in the tiers, above them the delegations of 11 species in the glassed galleries, and above them, drifting in the pale morning, the recorder drones of 200 worlds. She did not look at the drones. She had learned, years ago, not to look at the drones. She raised her right hand, palm out, fingers spread. The sound of 80,000 people went out like a lamp. And in the silence, in the old tongue, in a voice that carried without being raised, she spoke the words she had spoken once a year for 11 years, the words she had written herself when she was 19 and half mad with grief, the words that had made her famous across a third of the galaxy for reasons she despised. kaevoth. The Accord's translation engines, which were very fast and very stupid, rendered it instantly into 40 languages, and in every one of them it came out the same, and in every one of them it was wrong. Defeat me and claim me. The crowd roared. Up in the glassed galleries the delegations leaned forward, and somebody's drone camera pushed in tight on her face, and across 200 worlds, in bars and barracks and bedrooms, several billion beings settled in to watch the year's best spectacle. The undefeated warrior queen of the Kharuun, offering herself as a prize. That was the story. That was the story everyone told. Kharuun lowered her hand and thought, as she thought every year, the same 3 words in the privacy of her own skull, where no translation engine could reach. You fools, you absolute fools. Here is what the engines could not render, because the engines had been trained on trade pigeon and shipping manifests, and had never once been taught to read a poem. Kaevoth. In modern Kharuun it meant to take asterisk. That was the meaning that had traveled because it traveled easily, and because it was the meaning that men with money and men with guns had wanted it to have. To take, to seize, to claim. But kaevoth was an old word, older than the circle, older than the clans, and it came down out of the deep grammar of a language built by people who lived on a cold world where nothing survived alone. In the oldest texts, *kaevoth was not a verb of taking at all. It was a verb of answering. It was the word you used when you took up a burden that was not originally yours, the word a farmer used for a field she had not planted but would now tend, the word in the funeral rites when the living stood over the dead and promised to carry what the dead had been carrying. Kaevoth, we answer for you now. To kaevoth someone was not to own them, it was to become answerable to them, permanently, in both directions. And so the sentence Usera spoke into the roaring bowl every year, the sentence that had launched 1,000 lurid documentaries, actually meant something closer to stand against me, And if you can put me down, then be answerable to me and I to you for the rest of our lives. It was not an offer of a prize. It was an offer of a bond asterisk, the hardest thing she owned, and she put it on the table every single year. And every single year a parade of muscle and money and appetite came to take it from her. And not one of them, not one, in 11 years, in 311 challenges, had ever bothered to learn what she was actually saying. They came to win a woman. She stood there to see if anyone would come to win a asterisk promise asterisk. Nobody ever did. So she put them down, one after another, year after year, and the galaxy called her unbroken, and told itself a story about a prize nobody could quite reach. And Kharuun went home each night to an empty hall and washed other people's blood off her hands and told herself the rite was still worth keeping. Some years she almost believed it. To understand why she kept it, why she did not simply abolish a rite that the whole galaxy had turned into pornography, you had to go back to a girl of 11, standing in a doorway, watching her mother's name being scraped off a wall. The rite had not always been hers. The old rite, the one that had stood for 900 years before Answerable took a chisel to it, had been called the Von Kesh, and it had been exactly as ugly as the news feeds imagined. Under the Von Kesh, a warrior of rank could be asterisk claimed by conquest. Not asked, not courted, conquered. A man with a strong arm and a clan behind him could walk into a hall, put its mistress on her back in front of witnesses and speak the claim, and the law would hold. Her holdings became his holdings. Her oath fleet became his oath fleet. Her name went on the wall beneath his in the smaller script, and in 3 generations it would not be there at all. They had scraped Answerable's mother's name off the wall of the Kharuun Hall on a gray morning in the 5th month, and Answerable had stood in the doorway and watched the stonecutter work, and the stonecutter had been apologetic, and the apology had been the worst part. She had been a quiet child. She became a very quiet young woman. She trained the way water trains against a cliff, without hurry, without mercy, without any belief that the cliff would ever notice. And at 19 she had walked into the circle and challenged the rite keeper of the Von Kesh, an enormous, genial, absolutely lethal old man named Dorith Vec, who had held the law for 40 years and had never lost. She put him down in 8 minutes. And then standing over him, breathing hard, with 80,000 people screaming and the drones already pushing in, she did the thing nobody expected. She did not claim his holdings. She did not take his fleet. She asked the circle for the asterisk law instead. Not his land, not his ships, his asterisk words asterisk. They gave it to her because that was the law, and the law is a knife that cuts whoever holds it. She could not destroy the Von Kesh. That was the thing nobody outside her world ever understood. It was woven into 11 clans' charters, into the fleet oaths, into the marriage law of half a continent. Tear it out and you tore out the load-bearing wall of an entire civilization, and what came down in the rubble would not be the warlords. It would be the people the warlords ruled. So she did not tear it down. She inverted asterisk it. She wrote a new rite and named it kaevoth HFY, the standing answer, and its provisions were these, carved in her own hand in the old script, on the eastern face of the circle where every challenger had to walk past them. One who is claimed cannot be claimed against her will. The rite may be issued only by the one who stands in it. No man could ever again walk into a hall and take a woman by conquest. The only person who could put the claim on the table was the person whose life it was. The standing one holds the circle one day in each long year, and may not refuse any lawful challenger. Because a right you can withdraw whenever it is inconvenient is not a right. It is a privilege, and privileges are how the old law had lived. The claim being won may be spoken, or the victor being free may give the freedom back. And the standing one who falls, falls once. The right ends with her, she stands no more. That last provision was the one nobody ever talked about, because in 11 years nobody had ever gotten close enough to make it matter. It was, on its face, a piece of practical mercy. The loser of the circle was released from the burden of holding it. But Usera had written it at 19, alone at a table at 3 in the morning, and she knew exactly what it was. It was a door. She had built herself a cage that no one could open from the outside, no warlord, no consortium, no council, and then she had cut one small door in the back of it, and the key to that door was in someone else's hand, and the someone else did not exist yet, and might never. Beat me, the rite said, if you knew how to read it. Beat me, and I am free of this thing forever, and then being free choose, and I will choose too. 11 years, 311 challengers. Not one of them had come to read. 240 meters above the shine, in the humid glass box that the Accord had allocated to the newest and least important species in the room, a young man was reading the eastern face of the circle through a pair of borrowed field lenses, and his hands were not steady. Elias Wren was 26 years old, and he was, by the standards of everyone who had ever met him, an extremely unremarkable person. He was of medium height and slight build, with a xenolinguist's permanent stoop and a xenolinguist's permanent squint, and he had the kind of face that people described afterward as *nice, I think. He spoke seldom, and when he did it was usually to correct a translation, in a low apologetic voice that made the correction sound like an admission of guilt. He had been with the human delegation for 19 months, and in that time he had drafted 400 pages of protocol glossary and been thanked, formally, 0 times. He was also, though almost no one alive knew it, the only person in that amphitheater, possibly the only person in that star system, outside of the woman on the stone, who could read what was written on the eastern face. Not translate *. Anyone with an engine could translate. Elias could read. He had learned the old script the way you learn to love someone, badly, obsessively, over years, mostly alone. He had learned it from a dead grammarian's notebooks, from a stack of Kharuun funeral hymns that a station librarian had been about to recycle, and for the last 6 years, from a man. The man's name was Vekindal. He had been living, when Elias found him, in 3 rooms above a hydroponics bay on a nothing station in a nothing system. An enormous old Kharuun with gray seaming his arms like cracks in a cliff face, exiled from his homeworld for the crime of refusing, publicly, to fight in the circle. He had taken one look at the skinny human boy with the notebook and the terrible accent, and had said, in flawless trade, no. Elias came back every day for 4 months. On the 119th day, Vekindal let him in and said, "You want the grammar?" "Yes, sir." "The grammar is in the body." The old man held up one huge, scarred hand. "You cannot read our poems and not know how we stand. It is the same sentence. Do you understand me, boy?" "No, sir." "Good," said Vekindal. "Take off your coat." 6 years. 6 years of a small, quiet, physically unimpressive human being thrown onto a mat by an old man who never once raised his voice and never once let him quit. 6 years of learning the sword forms of the Kharuun not as a fighter learns them. Elias would never be a fighter. They both knew that from the first week, but as a linguist learns them. As syntax. As grammar. As a language with dialects and idioms and regional accents, and in every single speaker without exception, a a habit, a little unconscious signature, like the way a person crosses their sevens. Every warrior has an accent, Vekindal told him over and over for 6 years. Find the accent. Then you are not fighting a mountain, you are having a conversation. And once, only once late, when the old man had been drinking the sour black stuff his people made from fermented moss, and his eyes had gone somewhere far away, Vekindal had said, "I taught a girl once before. She was 9 years old and she had the worst hands I have ever seen on a child, and she worked harder than anyone I have ever known, and when she was 14 she broke her left wrist on a training post and did not tell me for 11 days because she thought I would make her rest. He had laughed and then stopped laughing. She fought around it. For 11 days she fought around it, and the wrist healed and she never fought around it less. It is in her forms now. Forever. Every time she commits to the deep line she drops that left shoulder half a hand, because she is protecting a bone that mended 15 years ago. Elias had said very carefully, who was she? And Vekindal had looked at him for a long moment with his ancient yellow eyes and said, someone who is going to spend her whole life standing on a rock while fools try to win her like a cup. Then he had gone to bed. And he had never spoken of her again, and Elias had never asked, and 8 months later the old man had died in his sleep, quietly, the way he had done everything. He left Elias his blade, his notebooks, and a debt that Elias had never known how to pay. "You're doing the face," said Petra Ivanovic, who was 44, cheerfully cynical, and the closest thing Elias had to a friend on the delegation. "What face?" "The face you do when the translation's wrong and you're too polite to say so." She dropped into the seat beside him and handed him a cup of the delegation's terrible coffee. "Go on, get it out of your system before you sprain something." Elias lowered the field lenses. Down on the shine, unimaginably far below, the first challenger of the day was walking out to meet the unbroken, a Vorusk of about 400 kilos, hung with ceremonial chain. "They're translating it as *claim*, Elias said quietly. "It is *claim*. It's on every feed in the Accord. Honestly, it's a hell of a line." "It's a hell of a line," Elias agreed. "It's just not what she said." Petra sipped her coffee. "So what did she say?" And Elias Wren, who had published exactly one paper in his life, a 40-page monograph titled * on the verb kaevoth, and the systematic mistranslation of the Kharuun standing rite *, reviewed twice, dismissed once, and read, as far as he could determine, by nobody at all, looked down at the woman on the black stone, alone in the middle of 80,000 people, and said, "She said, be answerable to me." Petra stopped with the cup halfway to her mouth. "She's not offering herself as a prize," Elias said. His voice had not gotten louder. It never did. "She's offering to be * responsible for someone and asking them to be responsible for her. It's the same word they use in the funeral rite when the living take up what the dead were carrying. It's a word about burden * Petra. There is no possession in it anywhere. There never was." Down on the stone, the Vorusk charged. The unbroken did not appear to move very much. The Vorusk hit the basalt like a dropped safe, and 80,000 people made a noise like weather. "She's been standing there for 11 years, Elias said, "asking the entire galaxy to make her a promise, and the entire galaxy keeps showing up to grab her." Petra was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Have you told anyone?" "I wrote a paper." "Did anyone read the paper?" Elias smiled faintly at nothing. "No," he said, "nobody reads the paper." The rite of the standing answer ran from first light to second dawn, 1 full Kharuun day, 31 hours, and by ancient custom the standing one did not leave the shine. She ate on the stone. She drank on the stone. When she needed to bind a cut she did it on the stone in front of everyone with her own hands, because the rite said *, the standing one holds the circle *, and Usratal Kharon had never in 11 years asked for a comma of grace she had not written herself. By the 9th hour she had put down 9 challengers. A Vorusk, 2 Kharuun clan sons, very young, very fast, and both, she thought sadly, sent by fathers who wanted the fleet. A Sethani duelist with a whip blade who made her work for 4 minutes and bowed to her afterward with real courtesy, and whose name she made a private note to remember. A human, the first ever to enter the circle. A hulking rim mercenary named Brax who came in with an expression of enormous confidence and left, 20 seconds later, in the arms of 2 attendants. She had been gentle with him. It had cost her something to be gentle with him, because of a thing he said to her, low, as they closed, which she did not intend to repeat to anyone. Then a Murith, then a second Vorusk, then 2 more Kharuun. The morning burned off. The bowl grew hot. The shine grew slick and was scoured and grew slick again. Up in the tears they chanted her name, and Usura let the sound wash over her without letting a syllable of it in, because she had learned a long time ago what a crowd is. A crowd loves you exactly as long as you are winning, and the moment you fall it makes the same noise, just as loud, and cannot tell you afterward what the difference was. Between the 11th and the 12th, she stood at the eastern face and drank water and read her own handwriting. The claim being won may be spoken, or the victor being free may give the freedom back. 19 years old, 3 in the morning, her hands shaking so badly she had ruined 2 blanks before she cut that line clean. Come on, she thought, to the eastern face, to the stone, to the 900 years, to nobody. One of you, just one. Look at what I wrote. The horn sounded. The 12th challenger came out of the western gate. Usura Kharuun set down the water and went back to work. Elias watched all of it. He did not cheer. He did not eat. He sat in the humid glass box with the field lenses pressed to his face until there were red rings around his eyes, and he watched her the way a scholar watches a text that is about to fall apart in his hands, and by the 14th hour he had stopped seeing a fight at all. He was seeing sentences. There the way she opened always with the low guard the Kharuun called the reading hand, weight back, blade low, the whole line of her body offered as bait. That was not a defense. That was a asterisk question. She asked every challenger the same question in the first half-second. What do you want? And every one of them answered it honestly, because bodies cannot lie. The ones who wanted glory came high. The ones who wanted her fleet came wide. And the ones who wanted asterisk or asterisk in the ugly way came in low and fast and grabbing. And she read the answer and gave them the reply they had earned, and it was over. 311 times, Elias thought. She has asked that question 311 times. And there the tell, Vekin Dal's tell. She was deep in the 14th bout, driving a Kharuun clanson back across the shine, and she set for the committed thrust the forms called the fall of names, and half a heartbeat before she went, her left shoulder dropped. Not much. Half a hand. A flicker so small that Elias, who had been asterisk told to look for it, who had spent 6 years being thrown on a mat by the man who taught it to her, almost missed it. He watched her do it 4 more times that afternoon. She had never lost with the fall of names. Not once in 11 years. It was the strike that had unseated Dorith Vec. It was the strike the poets wrote about. It was, Elias understood with a slow cold turning in his stomach, the only place in her entire grammar where she was not asking a question, the only place where she stopped listening, because she had never needed to listen there, because it had never failed. It was a hole in her, and it had been in her since she was 14, and it existed because a girl had once refused to tell her teacher that her wrist was broken. Elias lowered the lenses. His hands were shaking again. He thought, I could beat her. And then he thought, with a lurch of something close to horror, oh God, and so could anyone else who was told. The Osir Consortium's champion was the 29th challenger, and by then the sun had gone down and the great sodium lamps of the amphitheater had come up, and the shine was a white lake in the dark. His name was Rune Vask. He was not technically a warrior. He was an asterisk asset. The Osir did not have warriors. The Osir had holdings and portfolios and a genuinely impressive legal department, and when they needed something broken, they bought a creature that broke things. Vask had been bought young. He stood 2.5 meters, Kharuun by birth and something else by construction, and he walked out onto the shine with the loose, unhurried stride of a man who has already read the last page. Everyone in the bowl knew what he was there for. 2 weeks earlier, on the floor of the Accord, an Ossier factor had stood up and read into the record a very careful reading of the standing answer's third provision, the one that bound the standing one's oath fleet to the claim, and had noted, with the mild regret of a man reading a weather report, that the Kharuun oath fleet numbered 411 hulls, that it controlled the Vekhin Reach, and that under the plain text of Kharuun law, a lawful victor in the circle would acquire the fleet's oath along with the claim. They were not going to conquer the Vekhin Reach. That would have been expensive and slow, and the Accord would have voted sanctions. They were going to marry it. They were going to walk a bought man onto a rock, put a woman on her back in front of 80,000 of her own people, speak 6 words in a language they had not bothered to learn, and take 411 starships. And the whole thing would be immaculately legal, because it would be done inside the rite Kharuun had built with her own hands to keep exactly this from ever happening to anyone again. That was the joke. That was the enormous, screaming joke of it, and Elias Wren sat in the glass box with his fists closed and understood that he was probably the only person in the building who could hear it. They were going to strangle her with her own rope. The fight lasted 19 minutes, and it was the ugliest thing Ussera had ever been part of. Vask's augments were illegal. She knew it within 90 seconds from the sound his gauntlets made, a wrong sound, too dense, from the way he took a strike to the ribs that should have folded him and did not fold, from the temperature that came off his skin when they locked, a low industrial warmth, the warmth of a machine that is working. The rite had a provision for that. Of course it did. She had written it. The circle admits the body a challenger was born in. She had only to raise her hand and speak, and the rite keepers would take him off the stone in irons, and the Ossier would spend the next 4 years apologizing to a subcommittee. She did not raise her hand. Later, much later, when a very quiet human asked her why, she would try to explain it, and she would do a poor job because the truth was not a noble truth. The truth was this. She was 32 years old and she had been standing on that rock for 11 years, and she was so tired, and some sick, exhausted part of her wanted to know if this was the year. Some part of her, watching that bought machine come across the shine, had thought, if he can do it, then let him do it and let it be finished. She was not proud of that thought, but she had it. She was a person and people have thoughts. So she fought him. He fought like a demolition. There was no grammar in him at all, nothing to read, no question, no answer, just weight and force and the flat arithmetic of a thing designed to reduce another thing to rubble. He hit her in the 8th minute with a gauntleted forearm, and she felt 2 ribs go, a bright wet crack low on her right side, and the bowl made a sound she had never heard it make before, 80,000 people inhaling at once. She went down on one knee on the shine. And in the tiers and in the galleries, and on 200 worlds, an entire galaxy leaned forward to watch the unbroken break. She did not break. She got up, because getting up was the only thing she had ever been reliably good at, and stopped trying to outfight him and started instead to out-wait him, and it took another 9 minutes, and it hurt more than anything had hurt her in her adult life. And in the 17th minute Rune Vask made his single mistake. He got bored. He came in high and greedy to finish it, and Ussera Kharuun, kneeling in her own blood with 2 ribs floating loose in her side, did not meet him with strength. She did not have any strength left. She met him with a hooked foot and 80 kilos of falling weight and the whole 900 years of the reading hand, and she took his own momentum and put him through the stone. He did not get up. The amphitheater came apart. 80,000 Kharuun on their feet, screaming, the sound rolling around the bowl like an avalanche in a canyon, and in the glass box high above, a xenolinguist stood with his fingers pressed to the glass and found that he could not breathe. She stood alone on the shine in the sodium light with one arm wrapped around her ribs and her chin up and blood running down her right hip, and she looked, Elias thought, less like a champion than like a house that has survived a fire. The rite keeper's horn sounded. The old formula rolled out across the bowl. The circle stands open. Who comes? 11 hours remained until second dawn. And Elia's wren looked down at her, swaying, bleeding. An hour past the end of her strength, with a hole in her guard that a 14-year-old girl had put there, and that he, and possibly only he, could reach, and understood exactly what he was being offered. He could win. Tonight, right now, in front of 200 worlds, he could walk down onto that stone and take 3 minutes and put a broken woman on her back and speak 6 words, and the law would hold, and the fleet would be his, and she, in the way the whole galaxy meant it, in the lurid way, in the way of documentaries and bad translations, would be his too. It would be the cheapest victory in the history of the circle. And she would spend the rest of her life knowing that she had been taken while she was bleeding. Petra Ivanovic grabbed his arm. Elias, sit down. Whatever is happening on your face right now, sit *down. They'll do it again next year, Elias said. What? The Ossier. He was not really speaking to her. He had gone somewhere very calm and very cold, a place he had never been before and would remember for the rest of his life. They'll buy another one, a better one. They'll do it every long year until it works, because it costs them nothing and it costs her everything. And she cannot refuse a lawful challenger * Petra. She wrote that provision herself. She wrote it so that no one could ever hide behind their own power, and they're going to use it to grind her into the ground. He heard his own voice from a great distance. It was very quiet. It was always very quiet. And the only way it ever stops, the only way in her own law, the only door she left is if somebody beats her. Petra stared at him. You're a * translator *, she said. Yes, said Elias Wren and stood up. The delegation tried to stop him at the gallery door. He went past them. The Accord Protocol officer tried to stop him at the lift. He went past her too, not rudely. He apologized twice. He kept walking. Behind him, people were shouting into comms. Ahead of him, a corridor sloped down and down under the tiers, and the roar of 80,000 voices came through the stone like surf through a hull. And Elias Wren walked down through the belly of a 900-year-old building with his heart slamming and Vekindal's blade, which he had carried in his luggage for 6 years, across 9 postings, without ever once being able to explain to himself why, wrapped in cloth under his arm. At the western gate a rite keeper stopped him. An old Kharuun woman, gray to the elbows with *vora*, a face like a cliff. Human, she said. This is not a tour. I know. You are not permitted. Keshvan, said Elias, in the old tongue and the old grammar, with the deep form ending that had not been used in ordinary Kharuun speech for 400 years. Sek en vor kaevoth en shai, von esh. The rite keeper's face did not change, but something behind it did. I come to stand. I claim the challenger's grace under the standing answer. I am the last. There was a very long silence in that gate. Where, said the old woman slowly, did a human learn to speak like a funeral? An old man taught me, said Elias. His name was Vekindal. Something moved in the rite keeper's face then, something old and complicated, and she looked at the bundle under his arm, and she looked back at his face, and Elias watched a woman recalculate her entire evening. She stepped aside. Then walk, child, she said, and may the stone remember you. Ussara was on one knee at the eastern face, having the wound in her side packed with clotting gel by an attendant she had known since childhood, when the horn sounded again and the crowd noise changed. It changed to laughter. She looked up. Out of the western gate, alone, walking across 900 years of polished basalt, came a human. He was young, he was slight. He was wearing the plain gray underlayer of an Accord delegation uniform, having evidently left the jacket somewhere, and he was barefoot, because he had stopped at the edge of the shine to take his boots off, which no human had ever thought to do, and which every Kharuun in the bowl noticed instantly. He carried a wrapped blade under one arm the way a man carries a book. He did not swagger. He did not raise his hands to the crowd. He did not look at the drones. He walked out to the center of the shine and stopped a respectful 4 paces from her, outside the reach of a blade, outside the reach of an arm, precisely where a Kharuun stands when he does not wish to threaten. And then, while 80,000 people laughed at him, he knelt. Not the shallow bow of a courtier. The full kneel. Right knee down, blade laid flat on the stone before him, palms open on his thighs. The Kharuun call it sek enveth *. It is what a student does before a master. The laughter in the bowl faltered, rippled, and began, in patches, then in swathes, then everywhere, to die. Kharuun looked down at the small, quiet human kneeling on her stone, and felt something in her chest that she had not felt in 11 years, and did not have a name for, and did not, in that moment, trust at all. "Get up," she said in trade. Her voice was a ruin. "Boy. Get up." And the human raised his head and looked at her, really looked at her, straight, with gray eyes that were not laughing and not hungry and not calculating, and answered her in the old tongue, in the deep form, in the grammar of the funeral rites. "I have read what you wrote," said Elias Wren. The silence that fell over the amphitheater was not the silence of a crowd being quiet. It was the silence of 80,000 people trying to understand what they had just heard. Because the human had not spoken trade. He had spoken Kharuun, and not the Kharuun of the streets or the fleet or the news feeds, but the deep old form, the liturgical register, the language you used to bury your dead and to swear the oaths you did not intend to survive. He had spoken it with a strange, thin human accent, but he had spoken it correctly, case endings right, verbs in the answering mood, and in the tears old men who had not heard that grammar since their fathers' funerals sat down slowly and put their hands over their mouths. Asera stood very still. "Say that again," she said. "I have read what you wrote," said Elias, still kneeling, "on the eastern face, in your own hand. I have read all of it, standing one, including the last line." Something happened behind her eyes. It was very brief, and it was gone almost before it was there, and Elias, who spent his life reading things that flickered, saw it anyway and would think about it for the rest of his life. "Stand up," she said. "You look ridiculous." He stood. He left the blade on the stone. "Name." "Elias Wren." "You are a soldier." "No." "A duelist, a champion, someone's asset." Her voice was flat, exhausted, and cold as the far side of a moon. "Someone's investment." "No." "Then what are you?" "A translator," said Elias. The nearest recorder drone, which had drifted in close enough to catch every word, transmitted that sentence to 200 worlds, and on 200 worlds, several billion beings began, delightedly, to laugh. Asera did not laugh. She stood there with 2 ribs broken and her side packed with gel and her body screaming at her to lie down, and she looked at the small, quiet man in front of her, and she made the calculation she had made 311 times before, and for the first time in 11 years the calculation came out wrong. Because she was reading his body, she could not help it. It was what she was, and his body was not saying any of the things bodies said in this place. It was not saying *glory*. It was not saying *fleet*. It was certainly not saying the other thing, the ugly thing, the thing she had learned to see in a man's shoulders from 6 meters away. It was saying something she did not have a category for. It was saying, "I am terrified and I am not leaving." "The circle stands open," she said. "Do you challenge?" "Yes." "Then take up your blade." And Elias Wren said, in trade, clearly, so that the drones and the engines and the whole listening galaxy could not possibly misunderstand him. "No, not tonight." It took the rite keepers 4 full minutes to restore order. He had invoked the challenger's grace, sec and vor asterisk, an obscure provision of the standing answer that had been in the rite since Ussera wrote it and had never once been used, because it had never once been useful. It said simply that a lawful challenger might name the hour of his challenge, at any point before the closing of the circle at second dawn. It existed because Ussera, at 19, had been thinking about a challenger who arrived late, or lame, or from a distant world, and had wanted the rite to be fair. It had never occurred to her that anyone would use it to give asterisk her asterisk time. Second dawn, Elias said. The last hour of the circle. I claim the grace and I set my challenge at the last legal hour. Why? It came out of her louder than she meant it to. 80,000 people heard it. You have me now asterisk. Look at me, human, look at me. I can barely stand. You could put me down in a minute and a half and every law on this world would hold. That is what you came for. That is what all of you come for. So take it asterisk. And the human who was, she noticed distantly, shaking, whose hands had not stopped shaking since he walked out of the gate, looked up at her and said, quietly enough that the drones had to strain, I didn't come here to beat a wounded woman. The bowl went so quiet that the wind was audible. I came here to beat asterisk you. They carried Rune Vask out through the eastern gate on a repulsor pallet, and the Ossir factors filed a protest, and the rite keepers rejected it, and the sun of the Kharuun homeworld came up on the second morning of a 31-hour day. In the 11 hours between, the galaxy lost its mind. A translator, the feed screamed. Who is Elias Ren? The Accord convened an emergency session at 2 in the morning and could not agree on anything. The human delegation formally disavowed him, then unofficially retracted the disavowal, then stopped answering their comms. On a nothing station in a nothing system, a librarian who had once nearly recycled a stack of Kharuun funeral hymns turned on her screen and said, out loud, to an empty room, "Oh my God, that's the boy with the notebook." And in a stone gallery high on the northern rim of the amphitheater, at the 4th hour of the night, a healer finished stitching the gash in Ussera Tal Kharon's hip, told her the ribs would need 8 days, and that she would be given 4, and left her alone. She did not sleep. She lay in the dark with the fire in her side, thinking about a boy on his knees on her stone with his palms open, and she was angry, genuinely, blackly angry, angrier than she had been in years, and it took her 3 hours to understand why. It was because he had asterisk seen asterisk her. Not the unbroken, not the prize, not the fleet, not the poster, not the thing the drones came for. He had looked at her at the worst hour of the worst day of 11 years, when she was gel-packed and gray-faced and shaking, and he had refused to take the win, and in refusing it he had said, in front of the entire watching galaxy, a thing nobody had ever said about her out loud. She is not a thing that can be taken. She is a person you have to actually meet. And that was the exact sentence she had carved into the Eastern face when she was 19, in a language nobody read, and had waited 11 years for one single living being to say back to her. Ussera Tal Kharon lay in the dark in a stone room, 32 years old, undefeated, alone, and found that her eyes were wet, and was furious about that too. Then she got up and put on her coat and went to find him. He was on the northern rampart, sitting with his back against the parapet and his knees drawn up and the wrapped blade across them, looking out at the city. The Kharuun capital at night is mostly black, because the Kharuun do not much like light. It is a landscape of hills and towers picked out in thin lines of amber where the streets run, like the veins of a leaf held up against a lamp. It had been raining. The air smelled of wet basalt and cold iron. She stood in the archway some time before he noticed her, and when he did not startle and did not scramble up. He set the blade aside, got carefully to his feet, inclined his head and waited. That too was correct. Everything he did was correct. It was infuriating. "You should be resting," she said. "So should you." "I do not rest before the circle." "Neither do I, apparently." She came out onto the rampart. Walking was not enjoyable. She did it anyway and stopped a few paces from him and looked out at the amber veins of her city, and for a while neither of them said anything at all. "You have made me a fool," she said at last. "I don't think that's true." 200 worlds are watching a small human give the unbroken a asterisk night to heal, like a nurse. She searched for the trade word and could not find one ugly enough, like a asterisk charity asterisk. "Do you understand what you have done to me? Whatever happens at second dawn, they will say I was given it, that I was carried, that I could not stand on my own stone without a human boy holding my elbow." "Yes," said Elias, "I know." She turned her head and looked at him. "I thought about that for a long time," he said, "about what it would cost you. I couldn't find a way to do this that didn't cost you something, and I'm sorry." He said it simply, without self-pity, the way he apologized for everything. "But I decided I would rather be the man who insulted you by waiting than the man who beat you while you were bleeding. Because the second one," he stopped and started again. "The second one is the whole thing, isn't it? The second one is the entire 900 years. Somebody sees you at your weakest and decides that's the same as owning you." He looked out at the city. "I wasn't going to be that, not to you, not for a fleet, not for a headline, not for anything." Sarah said nothing for a long moment. Then in the old tongue, "Who taught you our grammar?" Elias closed his eyes. "Vekindal," he said. And the unbroken of the Kharuun made a small sound, as if she had been struck. She sat down. She had to. Her legs made the decision without consulting her. She sat down on the wet stone of her own rampart with her back against the parapet, and after a moment the human sat down too, 3 feet away, not touching, and they looked out at the black hills together like two people who had known each other a very long time. "He is dead," she said. It was not a question. "How long?" 6 years. "How?" "In his sleep, in his own bed. There was a plan on the windowsill that he was very proud of." Elias' voice was steady, and Sarah, who had spent her life learning to hear what bodies said, heard exactly how much that steadiness cost. "He was 81. "Good," said Sarah. "That is better than I feared." "He never told me who you were. Not directly. He told me about a girl who broke her wrist and didn't say." Sarah let out a breath that was almost a laugh, and it hurt her ribs, and she pressed her hand to her side and laughed anyway, once, painfully. 11 days, she said. "I hid it for 11 days. He found out because I flinched when he handed me a cup." She shook her head slowly at the amber city. "He put me over his knee like a child. I was 14 years old and 1.5 meters of pure spite, and he put me over his knee and he said, 'You will tell me when you are broken, because I cannot mend what you will not name.'" Her jaw worked. "He was exiled 4 years later for refusing to enter the circle, because he would not fight for an asterisk prize. He stood up in front of the clan lords and he said." She stopped. "A person is not a wager," said Elias quietly. "He said that. He said it to me too, about once a week for 6 years, usually while I was on the floor." Usara Tal Kharuun put her head back against the parapet and looked up at the wet black sky, and did not speak for some time. "They took his name off the hall," she said finally, "same as my mother's. There is a wall in this city where they keep the names, and every generation somebody with a chisel decides who gets to stay on it, and I have spent my entire life." Her voice did something briefly, and she brought it back under control with a discipline that Elias could actually see, a physical act, like a woman closing a heavy door. "I have spent my entire life trying to build one single law that a chisel cannot get at." "I know," said Elias. "I read it." "Nobody reads it." "I read it." She turned her head. "Tell me," she said. "Tell me what I wrote." And so, on a wet rampart, at the 5th hour of the night, with 11 hours left before he would have to try to break her, Elias Wren recited the standing answer to the woman who had written it, all of it, in the old tongue, in the deep form, every provision, every clause, the way you recite a poem you have loved for a long time. And when he came to the last line, he slowed down and said it very carefully, the way you set down something fragile. The claim being won may be spoken, or the victor, being free, may give the freedom back. He stopped. That line isn't practical, he said. Every other provision does work. That one doesn't do anything. It's not a mechanism, he made a small helpless gesture. It's a door. You built a fortress, and then you cut a door in the back of it that only somebody standing inside could ever use. And then you stood at the front gate for 11 years, and let the whole galaxy throw itself at the walls. Answerable did not answer. You didn't write that line for a challenger, Elias said. You wrote it for a person. You've been waiting 11 years to find out if such a person exists. The wind came up off the black hills and moved the rain on the stones. And you think that is you, Answerable said. Her voice was very low. No, said Elias. I have no idea if it's me. I hope it is. I've hoped it was for about 4 years, if I'm honest, which is a ridiculous thing for a translator to hope, and I never said it out loud to a single living soul. He looked at his hands. But that isn't why I'm here. I'm here because the Answerable are going to keep coming, and your law says you can't refuse them. And the only door out, the only one you left yourself, is on the other side of somebody beating you. He swallowed. So somebody has to beat you. And I would rather it was someone who's going to walk through that door and then close it. Kharuun sat in the rain and looked at him for a long, long time. You are very sure you can defeat me, she said at last. And there was, for the first time, the faintest edge of something in her voice that was not exhaustion and was not anger. No, said Elias, I'm not sure at all. I'm not fast, I'm not strong, and I have never in my life been in a real fight. He said it with the flat honesty of a man reading his own inventory. I know exactly one thing you don't know I know, and if I'm wrong about it, you're going to hurt me quite badly in about 10 hours, and I'll go home having made a fool of myself in front of the entire galaxy, and I'll have failed you, and the Answerable will buy a bigger machine. He got up, he picked up the wrapped blade. But somebody has to read the paper, he said. Eventually. Somebody has to actually read the paper. He turned to go. Human, she said. He stopped. Answerable rose slowly with her hand against her ribs. She crossed the wet stone. She stopped closer than the 4 respectful paces, close enough that he had to look up, and she studied his face with the terrible, unhurried attention of a woman who has spent 11 years learning to read exactly what people want from her. I have to try to break you, she said. You understand, not gently, not for show. I have never given anyone less than everything I have, and I will not insult you by starting now. If I find that door of yours before you find whatever it is you think you have found, I will put you down on that stone so hard your grandchildren will feel it. I know, said Elias Wren. Thank you. And Kharuun, unbroken, undefeated, 311 times a victor, stood in the rain on her own rampart, and discovered that she had absolutely no idea what to say. Second dawn, she managed. Second dawn, he agreed, and inclined his head and walked away into the dark, carrying a dead man's sword. Second dawn on the Kharuun homeworld comes gray and slow, the sun climbing out of a haze of volcanic dust that turns it the color of old brass. It came up over the eastern rim of the amphitheater at the 30th hour of the rite, and it found 100,000 people packed into a bowl built for 80. And it found, standing on the shine, a woman with 2 broken ribs and a small barefoot human holding an old blade. There had been no more challengers. Nobody else had come. The bowl had sat through the night, in the cold, in the rain, refusing to leave, and the feeds afterward would call it the largest continuous audience in the recorded history of the Accord, and none of that mattered at all to the 2 people on the stone. The rite keeper, The old woman from the western gate walked out between them, set her staff on the basalt, and spoke the closing formula in the old tongue. The circle stands open for 1 hour more. Challenger, do you come to stand? I come to stand, said Elias. Standing one, do you answer? I answer, said Usura. Then the stone will remember it. The rite keeper looked at the human for a moment longer than the ritual required. Then she withdrew. And the last hour of the rite of the standing answer began. Usura opened, as she always opened, with the reading hand. Weight back, blade low. Her whole body offered up as bait, the entire long line of her exposed, the oldest question in the Kharuun grammar hanging in the air between them. What do you want? 311 times, someone had answered that question honestly with their feet. Elias Wren did not move. He stood in the low guard she had opened with, her asterisk guard, the reading hand, mirrored back at her. The case ending of a sentence answered by the same case ending, and he waited, and he watched her, and he said nothing at all. Usura felt the hair rise on her arms. He is asking me back. She came in. She came in fast, because she had 2 broken ribs and 30 hours behind her and no time for a long conversation. And she came in with the flat driving high line that had ended 9 fights the previous day. And Elias Wren did the thing that Vekhan Dal had spent 6 years beating into him. He did not block, and he did not run. He gave ground correctly. He gave ground the way a good reader gives ground to a difficult sentence, receding, keeping distance, letting the shape of it arrive, and her blade went past his throat by the width of a finger and he was not there. And she had to check, and check asterisk hurt asterisk because of the ribs. She came again and again. She drove him back across the shine in a long shrieking exchange that lasted 11 seconds and covered 15 meters. And at the end of it, he was still on his feet, and she was breathing like a bellows, and the 100,000 people in the tiers had gone from laughing to silent to something else, a low animal hum of attention. He had not attacked, not once. Fight me, she snarled at him in the old tongue. I am, said Elias. And he was, that was the thing. He was fighting her exactly the way you fight a language you do not speak natively and cannot possibly outshout. He was listening. He was giving up ground and eating the exchanges and taking small, terrible punishments. A cut across the forearm that opened a red line to the bone sheath. A strike to the thigh that dropped him to one knee for a horrible half-second. And every single time, he was watching her left shoulder. Because he needed her to throw the fall of names. And she would not. 6 minutes in, he understood, with a lurch of despair, asterisk why she would not. She had never needed to. The fall of names was the finish, the closing argument, the strike you threw when a man had committed and you were going to end him, and Elias Wren was not committing to anything. He was giving her nothing to close on. He had built his whole strategy around a hole in her guard that only opened when she went for the kill, and by refusing to attack her, he had made absolutely certain that she never would. He had trapped himself inside his own respect. The blood from his forearm was running down into his palm, and the grip was going slick, and he had perhaps 2 minutes of stamina left in a body that had been designed for reading, and Elias Wren stood in the middle of 900 years of polished basalt and understood that he was going to lose. And then he heard, quite clearly in his own head, in the flat, unimpressed voice of a dead old man in a hydroponics bay. You cannot read our poems and not know how we stand. It is the same sentence. The same sentence. The fall of names was not just a strike. It had an asterisk name asterisk. It had a name because it had come out of the funeral rite. The asterisk fall of names was the moment in the burial when the dead are called and the living answer, when the whole hall speaks the word asterisk kaevoth over a body and takes up what that body was carrying. It was not a killing blow. It was a asterisk promise asterisk. And you did not throw a promise at an enemy. You threw it at someone you had decided to be answerable to. Elias ran, bleeding, exhausted, 30 seconds from the end of everything, made the only bet available to him. He dropped his guard. He let the blade fall out of line, let it swing wide, let his chest open, let the whole long, vulnerable column of himself stand naked on that stone in front of a woman who could kill him with a thought. And he looked her in the eyes across 4 meters of shine, and he said, in the deep form, in the grammar of the funeral rite, loud enough for the drones and the engines and 200 worlds, "Answerable Kharuun, I am answerable for you." And the unbroken, who had stood on that rock for 11 years, who had asked the same question 311 times and had never once, not once in her entire life, received an answer. Through the fall of names. It was not a decision. It came out of her the way a sob comes out of a person, from underneath, from a place no discipline reaches, the deepest sentence in her body answering the only word it had ever waited for, and half a heartbeat before it landed, her left shoulder dropped half a hand. Elias did not dodge. He could not have dodged. She was far too fast, and he had known that from the beginning, and this had always been the price. He turned his hip 4 degrees, so that the strike took him through the meat of the shoulder instead of the center of the chest, and he stepped into it, inside the arc, inside the reach, close, chest to chest, close enough to feel the heat coming off her skin, and the impact broke his collarbone with a sound like a snapped pencil and drove the air out of him in a white flash of agony. And his good hand found the outside of her knee. He did not have strength. He had never had strength. What he had was 6 years of an old man saying the grammar is in the body asterisk, and the exact place where a woman with 2 broken ribs could not resist a rotation to her right. And he hooked, and he turned, and he put every gram of his own falling weight into a direction that her damaged body could not argue with. They went down together. They hit the shine hard, and the whole enormous bowl of the world made one single sound, and when it cleared, Elias Wren was on the stone, on his side, with his broken shoulder screaming and his vision going white at the edges. And Answerable Kharuun was under his knee, on her back, her sword arm folded up behind her at the exact angle that ends the argument, her own forearm laid across her throat by his good hand, in the pin that the old texts called asterisk the mercy. Her free hand was open on the stone. She could not rise. Both of them knew it. Every Kharuun in that amphitheater knew it, and knew it instantly, because they had all been raised on those forms since they could walk. The unbroken was broken. The bowl went absolutely, perfectly silent, 100,000 people, and the drones and 200 worlds. And in that silence Elias Wren, shaking, bleeding, kneeling on the woman he had just defeated, felt her stop fighting under his hands. She let out a breath, and she turned her head and looked up at him, and her eyes were wet and furious and something else, something enormous, and she said quietly, only to him in the deep form, "Speak the claim." The whole galaxy leaned in. 6 words. That was all it took. 6 words in a language almost nobody in the room could speak, and 411 starships would change hands, and the Veckan reach with them, and the unbroken of the Kharuun, the prize of 200 worlds, the thing the documentaries were about, would belong, in law and in the eyes of every watching species, to a 26-year-old translator. He had won, it was done, the law would hold. Elias Wren looked down at her. And then, very carefully, because his collarbone was in pieces, and because this needed to be done asterisk right asterisk, he took his hand off her throat. He took his knee off her arm. He sat back on his heels on the polished stone, set the old blade down flat beside him, and lifted both palms, turning them outward empty. And he said in the old tongue, in the deep form, in the grammar of the funeral rites, clearly, so that the engines could not soften it and the drones could not miss it, and 900 years of stone could not fail to hear it. Kaevoth and Thes, I give the freedom back. Nobody moved. For 3 full seconds, in an amphitheater holding 100,000 people, absolutely nothing happened at all. The words hung in the cold brass light. The translation engines, encountering a construction that had not been spoken aloud in living memory, hesitated, actually hesitated, an audible half-second of dead air across 200 worlds, and then rendered it flatly, with the profound stupidity of machines. I give the freedom back. And then the eastern face of the circle, where a 19-year-old girl had cut a line into black basalt at 3 in the morning with her hands shaking, was suddenly the most important 30 centimeters of stone in the galaxy. The claim being won may be spoken, or the victor being free may give the freedom back. The Rite Keeper came out onto the shine at a dead run. She was 90 years old and she came out at a asterisk run, her staff forgotten, and she stopped over the 2 of them. The human sitting back on his heels with his collarbone shattered, the standing one flat on the stone with her arm still where he had left it. And the old woman looked from one to the other, and looked at the eastern face, and put a hand over her mouth. Then she straightened. Then she lifted her staff, and brought it down on the basalt, and roared the formula in a voice that carried to the top tier of a bowl built to hold a war. The circle is taken. The sound that went up then was not cheering. It was too big and too strange and too full of grief to be cheering. The standing one has fallen. By her own writ, she stands no more, not this Longyar, nor any Longyar, nor ever again. The right of the standing answer is ended. She turned slowly, deliberately. She faced the glass galleries, faced, specifically, the box where the Ossier factors sat, and every drone in the sky swung to follow her, and the old woman said, in perfect, glacial, unmistakable trade, "The circle is closed. There is no right. There is nothing left here to buy." Kharuun lay on her back on 900 years of polished basalt, in the gray morning, in front of 100,000 of her own people, and could not seem to make herself get up. Her arm was free, her throat was free. Her whole life, quite suddenly and without any warning at all, was free, and she could not move, because there was a thing happening in her chest that 11 years of discipline had no procedure for, and if she moved, she was going to come apart in front of the entire galaxy. He didn't take it. He had all of it. He had me and the fleet and the reach and every camera in the Accord, and he put his hands up and gave it back. She turned her head. The human was still sitting there, and he was in an extremely bad way, his face the color of ash, his left arm hanging wrong, blood from the forearm cut making a small dark lake on the shine. He was not looking at the crowd. He was not looking at the drones. He was not raising his fist or claiming anything or saying a single word to the 200 worlds who were, at that moment, screaming his name. He was looking at her, with a kind of exhausted terror, to see if she was all right. "You idiot said Kharuun. "Probably," Elias agreed. His voice had gone thin and far away. "I'm sorry about I think I broke something. I might be about to fall over. I didn't want to fall over in front of everyone, but it does seem to be happening." "Then fall over," she said, and reached up and caught him as he did. She held him against her good shoulder on the cold stone while the medics came, and the bowl thundered, and 100,000 voices roared a name they had learned 4 hours ago, and Ussara pressed her mouth to the top of his bloody head, where nobody could see, and said something in the old tongue, very quietly, that no drone was ever able to recover. The engines never translated it. They wouldn't have gotten it right anyway. The fallout took 11 weeks, and it was ugly, and most of it happened in rooms with carpet. The Ossier Consortium fought. Of course they fought. They had a genuinely impressive legal department. They argued first that the human's victory was void because he had not spoken the claim, and therefore no victory had legally occurred. The Kharuun Rite Keepers replied, in a filing of 4 sentences, that the provision was carved into the eastern face of the circle in the hand of the woman who wrote the law, that it had been there for 11 years, and that the consortium was welcome to come and read it. They argued, second, that the standing answer could not be permanently dissolved by a single bout. The right keepers filed a copy of the writ. The Accord's arbitration panel read it, and read it again, and ruled in language a Sethani jurist later called unusually emotional for a procedural finding, that the rite had contained its own termination clause since the day it was written, that the clause had now been triggered, and that the consortium's entire strategy had been an attempt to exploit a law designed from its first line to make that exploitation impossible. And they argued, third, and this was the one that finished them, that Kharuun Vask's defeat should be set aside. They should not have done that. It obliged the right keepers to release the medical scans. Vask had been carrying 9 kilos of illegal hardware, paid for through 3 shells and a shipping concern, and the shipping concern's registration documents bore the signature of an factor who had, 2 weeks before, stood on the floor of the Accord and read the standing answer's 3rd provision into the record, with the mild regret of a man reading a weather report. The consortium lost the Vekhen Reach contracts. It lost its Accord trading license for 6 years. It lost, more importantly, the thing it had actually been built out of, the widespread belief that it was too clever and too well lawyered to be embarrassed. And in the middle of it, in the depositions, in the endless gray rooms, a right keeper asked Kharuun, on the record, the question everyone had been too polite to ask. Standing 1, you knew the augments were unlawful. Your own writ gave you the right to stop that bout at any moment. Why did you not raise your hand? And Usara, who had had 11 weeks to prepare a dignified answer, looked at the panel and gave them the true one instead. Because I was tired, she said, and a part of me hoped he would finish it. She let that sit in the room. You may put that in the record, she said, all of it. I am done pretending that the woman on the stone was made of stone. They put Elia's wren back together in a Kharuun infirmary, an experience he described afterward as extremely efficient and not remotely gentle. The collarbone took a pin. The forearm took 40 stitches. He was in a bed for 6 days and in a sling for 4 weeks, and in the meantime the galaxy did what the galaxy does. He became, for about 9 weeks, the most famous human alive. He hated it with a completeness that surprised even him. There were interviews, endorsements, an offer from a Rim Entertainment Consortium for the exclusive rights to what they insistently called his story, by which they meant a story about a man who won a woman. 3 governments offered him citizenship. A publisher who had rejected on the verb kaevoth 6 years earlier wrote him a very warm letter proposing a revised edition. And Elias, who was not, in general, a vindictive person, took an unworthy amount of pleasure in not replying to it. He gave exactly one statement. He wrote it himself in the infirmary, one-handed, and read it out in a corridor to a wall of drones in his usual quiet voice, and it lasted 41 seconds. There has been some confusion about what happened on the circle, said Elias Wren, and I'd like to clear it up because I'm a translator and this is, technically, my job. The word kaevoth does not mean claim. It has never meant claim. It means to become answerable to *. It is the word the Kharuun use at funerals, when the living promise to carry what the dead were carrying. It goes in both directions, and there is no ownership in it anywhere. For 11 years, a woman stood on a rock and offered, in public in her own language, to be answerable to someone who could reach her, and asked them to be answerable to her in return. And for 11 years, 200 worlds mistranslated that as an invitation to come and take her. She was never a prize. She was never anyone's to win. What she was offering was harder than that and better than that, and about 1 billion people owe her an apology for the last decade of headlines. I have nothing else to say, and I'd be grateful if you would all go away." They did not, of course, go away. But that clip was viewed 4 billion times in a month, and somewhere in the middle of that month, the news feeds quietly, without ever announcing it, stopped running the old line under her picture. The Accord recalled him at the end of the 11th week, as it was always going to. It was framed as a promotion, which was how the Accord framed everything embarrassing. There was a posting on a station 4 jumps out, a good one, with a linguistics division and a budget. And it began in 9 days, and Elias Wren packed his 3 bags in a room in the Kharuun capital, and did not, at any point, allow himself to think about the thing he was not thinking about. He had seen her twice since the circle. Once in the infirmary briefly, with 4 rite keepers and a medic present, where they had spoken with great formality about the Osir filings and had not looked at each other at all. And once in a hearing room across a table, where she had passed him a note that said in the old script, "Your accent is improving. It is still terrible." That was all. 11 weeks. And what exactly had he expected? He had done a thing on a rock in front of 100,000 people, and the thing had been "Don't take her asterisk," and he had meant it. And the whole point of meaning it was that you did not then stand around afterward with your hand out, waiting to be thanked with the very thing you had refused. That was the oldest trap there was. I gave you your freedom, and now here is my invoice. He was not going to do that to her. So he packed his bags, and on the last evening, because he could not stand the room any longer, he walked up through the black terraces of the old city in the rain, to the northern rampart, to the same wet parapet, and stood there a long time looking out at the amber veins of a city that was not his and never would be. He had won the most famous fight in living memory, and he had never felt so thoroughly like a footnote in his life. "You walk," said a voice behind him, "like a man who has been thrown on a mat by a professional." Elias closed his eyes. Then he turned around. Usera Talkaran stood in the archway with the rain in her hair. She was not in armor. She was not in ceremonial anything. She was wearing a plain old coat and workman's boots, and she looked, for the first time since he had laid eyes on her, like a person who had somewhere ordinary to be. "Standing one," he said. "No," she said. "Sorry. I am not the standing one." She came out onto the rampart. "I have not been the standing one for 11 weeks. There is no standing one. Someone ended the rite." She stopped a few paces from him. "A translator, I am told, very small, extremely irritating, reads too much." Elias found that his mouth was dry. "How are the ribs?" he said. "Mended. How is the shoulder?" "Also mended. Mostly it clicks." "Good," said Usera. "It should click. You stepped into a fall of names, you asterisk lunatic." Her voice cracked on it just slightly, and she stopped, and stood very still, and got hold of herself with that visible physical discipline he had seen on this rampart 11 weeks before, a woman closing a heavy door. Then, deliberately, she opened it again. "I have been trying," she said, "for 11 weeks to find the correct way to say a thing to you. I have written it 17 times. I have burned all 17. I was raised to believe that what cannot be said cleanly should not be said at all, and I have discovered at 32 that this is not wisdom. It is only fear with good posture." The rain came down on the black stone. "So I am going to say it badly," said Usera Talkaran, "and you will have to forgive the grammar." "My grammar's not perfect either," said Elias. "Your grammar is appalling asterisk. I am going to speak now, and you are going to be quiet." He was quiet. "When I was 11, she said, "I watched a man take my mother's name off a wall. When I was 19, I took the law away from the man who let him. And for 11 years I stood on that rock and let 311 people try to break me. And every year when I said the words, I meant them completely. And every year the person who came out of that gate was answering a question I had not asked. You will never understand what it is to be looked at by 200 worlds and never once be seen asterisk. I hope you never understand it. It is a very specific loneliness, and I would not put it on anyone. And then a human knelt on my stone. She stopped, started again. You gave me a night to heal when you could have had everything. You told 100,000 people you would not fight a wounded woman. You put your hands on me in the mercy and then you took them off. Her jaw worked. Do you know what the galaxy thinks that was? Chivalry. A beautiful gesture. Every feed in the Accord is running it as a asterisk romance, a boy giving up a prize. I know, said Elias. It's very annoying. It is obscene, said Usura. Because it was not a gesture, it was an asterisk argument asterisk. You stood on 900 years of that stone and made an argument in my own language in the deep form in front of every clan lord and every chisel on this world, and the argument was, she is not a thing that can be taken. Her voice dropped very low. Nobody has ever made that argument for me. Not my clan, not my council, not one of the 311. I had to carve it into a rock myself when I was 19, and then defend it with my body every year for 11 years alone. And I was so tired, Elias. I was so asterisk tired. She stopped. She breathed. And then a very small man with a terrible accent read the paper, she said. They stood in the rain. I'm leaving in 9 days, said Elias, because he was, at heart, a coward about exactly one thing, and it was this. I know, 4 jumps out. Linguistics Division, 300 staff, absurd budget. She lifted an eyebrow. I have friends in the Accord. It is very tiresome for everyone. I wasn't going to ask you for anything, he said. It came out rougher than he meant. I want to be clear about that. I didn't do it asterisk to be owed. If I walked away from that claim and then stood around waiting for you to hand it to me anyway, then I never refused it at all. I just found a slower way to take it, and I would rather get on the ship. He looked away at the Amber City. I would rather get on the ship and know that you're free than stay and find out that all I ever wanted was to be thanked. Usura Kharuun looked at him for a long moment with an expression he could not read at all. Yes, she said. I know that. That is precisely the problem. And then she crossed the wet stone and stopped in front of him, closer than the 4 respectful paces, close enough that he had to look up, and she went down slowly, deliberately on one knee. Right knee to the stone, palms open on her thigh, her head raised, her eyes level with his, unflinching. Sekenveth. It is what a student does before a master. It is what the challenger does before the circle. It is what Elias Wren had done, barefoot on the shine, in front of 100,000 laughing people, 11 weeks before. Get up, said Elias in a voice that had entirely stopped working. Usura, get up. No, said Usura Kharuun, you are going to let me finish. You are going to stand there, and you are going to let me asterisk finish. Because for 11 years the entire galaxy has been telling a story about a woman who could be won, and I am about to end that story permanently, and I intend to do it asterisk correctly. And she said, in the old tongue, in the deep form, in the grammar of the funeral rites, clearly, into the rain, to no crowd, to no drones, to nobody at all except the man in front of her. I am not claimed. I am not one. No one on any world may take me now or ever, and that is finished, and it is finished because of you. She drew a breath. So I am free, and being free I choose. Elias Wren, I am answerable for you, be answerable for me. And then in trade, in a voice that shook. I'm asking, do you understand? Nobody defeated me and nobody claimed me, and there is no right and there is no law and there is nothing forcing your hand or mine. There is only a woman on a wet rock asking. You may say no. You may get on your ship. I will carry it and I will not come after you, and I will asterisk not. Her voice broke, and she let it break and did not close the door. I will not think less of you. Not for 1 hour. Not ever. The rain fell on the black stone of the northern rampart. And Elias Wren, 26 years old, unremarkable, a translator, The man who had read the paper knelt down on the wet stone in front of her, so that they were exactly the same height, which is the only height that has ever mattered. He took her hands. Kaevoth, he said. Yes, God, yes. In every case ending there is. The wall of names in the Kharuun capital is 900 years old, and it is very long, and it is not, on the whole, a happy object. Generations of chisels have been at it. There are gaps in it where women used to be. In the spring of the following year, the rite keepers cut 2 names into it. They cut Vekin Dal exiled, restored the old man who had said that a person is not a wager and had been sent away for it. And beneath his, in the deep old script, they cut a line written by a 19-year-old girl at 3 in the morning with her hands shaking, which had waited 11 years to be true. The claim being won may be spoken, or the victor being free may give the freedom back. They did not cut Usura's name into it, because Usura had asked them not to, and had been extremely difficult about it, and had eventually won. Put up the law, she had told them. Names come off, let them try to get a chisel into that. She did not go with him to the station 4 jumps out. She had 411 ships and a reach to hold, and she was nobody's follower, and he would not have wanted her to be. He did not stay in the capital and become a decoration on her arm. He had a linguistics division and a language to give back to the people it belonged to, and she would not have wanted that either. What they had instead was harder and better and entirely their own. A thing built out of jumps and letters and long-range comms and 4 weeks together out of every 16. A thing with arguments in it and separate work, and 2 people who kept saying, in 2 languages, across an enormous amount of empty space, I am still answerable to you. It held, it is, at the time of this telling, still holding. And on a black basalt disk in a bowl built for a war, the circle stands empty. They do not hold rites there anymore. The Kharuun use it now for the funeral of anyone who asks, for the fall of names, for the moment when the living stand over the dead and take up what the dead were carrying. And the shine at its center is slowly, year by year, growing dull again, because nobody stands in the middle of it now. The galaxy still tells the story wrong, mostly. There will be a feed drama about it eventually, there always is. It will be called something lurid. In it, a woman will be one. But on the Kharuun homeworld, when the old ones tell it, and they tell it often, because it is a good story and because it is theirs, they tell it in the old tongue, in the deep form, and they always end it the same way. Defeat me, she said, to 200 worlds for 11 years. And be answerable to me. And the worlds heard claim me and came to take her, and failed 311 times. And then one quiet man came who had bothered to learn what she was actually saying, and he defeated her, and he did not claim her. And so, at last, having nothing left to lose and no law left to bind her and no one on any world with the right to take a single thing from her, Usura Tal Kharuun knelt down in the rain on her own free feet and claimed him.